All right, so let's take a deep dive into these articles all about Iran and the future of the country. Specifically, who might be taking over as supreme leader? It seems like there's a lot of mystery surrounding Ayatollah Khamenei's health, and there are a lot of rumors going around about his successor.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating situation. There are all these conflicting reports about Khamenei. Some say he's really sick, maybe even in a coma, but then others show him meeting with officials looking pretty healthy.
It's almost like we're missing pieces of a puzzle. So what should we believe? Is the 85-year-old Khamenei really on his way out? Or is this all just rumors?
Well, I think it's definitely more than just rumors. There are these reports of a secret meeting of the Assembly of Experts, and they're the ones responsible for choosing the new supreme leader. I think that suggests things might be a little more urgent than it seems on the surface.
Yeah, that definitely adds to the mystery. And of course, the name at the center of all this is Mojtaba Khamenei, the current supreme leader's son.
Right, Mujtaba is someone who seems to like to stay out of the public eye. Some sources say he played a big part in stopping the 2009 election protests, while others talk about his studies in religion and his rise in the clergy. It's sort of a strange combination.
It's almost like we're talking about two different people. What I find fascinating is how he stays out of the spotlight. It makes you wonder what kind of leader someone like that would be.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? It's hard to know what his leadership style would be like from what we know so far. He could be just like his father, or he could be completely different.
And that brings us to the most important question for us. How would a change in leadership, especially with someone like Mujtaba, affect the everyday lives of people in Iran?
That's such a crucial thing to think about. It could have a huge impact. Take Mojtaba's role in the 2009 protests, for example. It makes you wonder what his stance is on things like protests and civil liberties. Would he be more authoritarian and take away even more freedoms?
That's a scary thought. A new supreme leader could change things both inside and outside the country. Everything from money and jobs to social freedoms to relationships with other countries could be affected.
Absolutely. We really need to understand how these changes at the top could affect the lives of everyday people in Iran.
That's exactly it. These aren't just political things happening far away. They could have a direct impact on millions of people's lives.
And that's exactly why we need to dig deeper into those potential impacts. For example, Iran has been struggling with sanctions for years now. So how might a new leader affect those sanctions? And then how would that affect families in Iran?
That's a really good point. It's easy to get caught up in all the politics, but we can't forget about the people.
Mhm.
What are everyday Iranians hoping for? What are they afraid of with all this uncertainty?
I think a lot of them are probably anxious and apprehensive. They know about the rumors and the speculation, and they know things could change, but speaking out against the government in Iran can be dangerous.
So how are they dealing with all of this? How are they understanding these potential power shifts and what it might mean for them?
Well, based on some reports, it seems like many are just waiting to see what happens. They're looking for signs of what the future holds, and they're talking to their friends and family to get information and share their thoughts.
It's like there's a whole other conversation happening, away from the official news and statements.
Exactly. And I think that's where the real story is, in the everyday lives and experiences of the Iranian people.
You know, you're right. It's easy to focus on all the big global effects of this situation, but in the end, it's the human impact that matters most.
I completely agree. And that impact has so many sides to it. We talked about the economic and social impacts, but there's also a psychological impact. Living under a government that can seem unpredictable and even threatening can really take a toll.
That's a really important point. How do people find hope and stay resilient when they're facing so much uncertainty?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the people of Iran have a long history of resilience and resourcefulness. They've dealt with challenges and hardship before, and they've found ways to adapt and keep going.
But even resilience has its limits, right?
Of course. And that's why it's so important to keep paying attention to what's happening in Iran, to give a voice to the everyday people, and to hold those in power accountable.
So we've been talking about how a new leader could make things tougher for people in Iran financially, but what about social freedoms? Could those be affected too?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Iran has a really young population and they're full of energy. So there's this constant tension between the people who want more social freedom and the more conservative parts of the government.
And when you consider Mujtaba's alleged role in the 2009 crackdown on those protests, it makes you wonder, could we see more of that if he's in charge?
Yeah, that's definitely something to be concerned about. The sources we have make him seem like someone who's not afraid to use force to stay in control. That could mean cracking down even harder on things like free speech and freedom of assembly. It could even mean controlling what information people have access to.
What about the impact on women? They've already been dealing with so many restrictions.
Right. That's another big thing to keep an eye on. Women in Iran have been fighting for equality and freedom for a long time. If a more hardline leader takes over, it could set back a lot of the progress they've made, especially when it comes to things like what they can wear and their opportunities in education and work.
It seems like a really complex situation with so many potential consequences. It makes me wonder, how are normal people in Iran handling all this uncertainty? Are they talking about these issues openly, or is there a sense of fear that's preventing them from speaking freely?
Well, from what we've seen in some reports, there's definitely a lot of anxiety and worry under the surface. People know about the rumors and the speculation, and they know that things could change. But in Iran, speaking out against the government can be really dangerous.
So how are they coping with all of this? How are they making sense of these potential power shifts and what they could mean for their lives?
It seems like a lot of them are just waiting to see what happens. They're trying to figure out what the future holds, and they're talking to their friends and family to share information and opinions.
It's almost like there's this secret conversation going on,
Right.
separate from what the government is saying or what's being reported in the news.
Exactly, and I think that's where the real story is, in the lives and experiences of the everyday people of Iran.
You know, you're right. It's easy to get caught up in the big global picture, but at the end of the day, it's the impact on real people that matters most.
I couldn't agree more. And that impact is so multifaceted. We've already talked about the economic and social aspects, but there's also a psychological aspect to consider. Living under a government that feels unpredictable or even threatening at times can really take a toll on people.
That's a really important point. How do people find hope and strength when they're facing so much uncertainty?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the people of Iran have a long history of resilience. They've faced difficult situations before, and they've always found ways to adapt and carry on.
But even resilience has its limits, doesn't it?
Of course. And that's why it's so important to keep shining a light on what's happening in Iran, to make sure the voices of the people are heard, and to hold the people in power accountable.
So it really seems like Iran is at a crossroads right now. There are so many different directions the country could go in. What are some of the biggest factors that will decide which path they take?
Well, I think one of the most important things is how much support the new leader has from the people. Will Mojtaba have the same authority and respect as his father? Or will people in Iran push back against him?
That's a really good question. It makes me think about the assembly of experts and their role in all of this. They're the ones who actually choose the supreme leader. But how much power do they really have? Are they truly independent, or are they controlled by other powerful people in the Iranian system?
That's actually something people debate a lot. Some people say the assembly is just a rubber stamp for the ruling elite, while others think they can actually limit the supreme leader's power.
So there could be conflict within the Iranian government itself. This is starting to feel like a really complicated puzzle.
And we haven't even talked about how this could affect other countries. How could a new leader in Iran change the balance of power in the Middle East? What could it mean for countries like Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States?
It's a lot to think about. And it really shows how connected the world is. What happens in Iran doesn't just stay in Iran. It affects global politics and economics.
Yeah.
And it can even make us feel less secure here at home.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to stay informed, to have thoughtful conversations about these things, and to really consider all the different ways these events could affect the world.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive today, what's the main message you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that the story isn't over yet. There's still a lot we don't know, and things could get better or worse. But at the center of all of this are the people of Iran. Their hopes, their dreams, their resilience. Their story is the one that matters most.
Absolutely. And to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep learning about what's happening in Iran. Don't just read the headlines. Look for different points of view. And form your own opinions based on all the information you can find. The future of Iran, and maybe even the world, depends on the decisions that are made in the coming months and years.